In the wake of a Conservative motion that threatened to defeat the minority government, the opposition has tabled a new one, and the Liberals have their gloves on again. The Conservatives want the Health Committee to investigate the government's pandemic response. But the Liberals say the demand for documents would hold up public servants working around the clock to support Canadians during the pandemic. We've reached the Minister of Public Services and Procurement, Anita Anand, in Oakville, Ontario. Minister, welcome back to the show.
Hi, David. Thanks for having me.
Minister, the Conservatives say this motion would look at the COVID response and learn from possible missteps in the first wave. Is there not some merit to that argument?
Listen, I am fully on board with the need for all members of our House of Commons to work together. And in that vein, we made public a number of documents and contracts in the summer relating to our PPE procurements. And so, yes, we really do need to work together. The issue that I have with the motion relates to the production of documents that are highly sensitive. For example, our advance purchase agreements for vaccines. Those were hard-fought contracts, and they contain very sensitive information, and I do not want to risk these contracts and the procurements that they will lead to, because I believe that the health and safety of Canadians would be at stake.
But could not the law clerk and the people who work for the House of Commons vet those and redact the critical information out of those to protect the national interest in those cases?
In some cases, David, we are still in negotiations, whether we're talking about vaccine procurements, PPE procurements, and rapid test procurements. These negotiations are still occurring. And if we release all of the documents that the Conservatives are requesting, we will undermine our negotiations. We will undermine our contracts. And I do not believe that is in the best interest of the health and safety of Canadians. And that is my underlying concern with this motion. David, I practiced corporate law and I taught corporate and securities law for 22 years. I know agreements of this sort, and I am very concerned with releasing information that would jeopardize our procurements at this moment in time.
One of the other complaints about this motion that members of your government have made is that the 15 days that it gives officials to turn over the volume of documents they're looking for is just not enough time to realistically do it. But when Patty Hajdu, the health minister, was asked today multiple times, what is a realistic time frame? She wouldn't say. So, what is a realistic time frame for your government to turn these documents over if the Commons adopts this motion?
Well, thanks. I appreciate the question. For me, it's not a question of the time frame. We're in the middle of a second wave, David. Our procurements are still occurring. We need to ensure that those contracts will continue to provide for us, that the corporations and the suppliers with whom we are speaking will continue to do business with us. If we go ahead and release information, that will undermine our supplier relationships. And it's not just me as minister who is saying this. The president of the Auto Parts Manufacturers Association today said firms from across the country dropped everything to help save lives by making critical goods for every government in Canada, every political stripe. We all work together, end quote. In other words, this is a cross-Canada effort, and we all need to contribute to it. And I am very concerned with releasing documents, vaccine contracts, PPE contracts, emails, and the like, because we will undermine those relationships.
Minister, sorry to interrupt, but the motion says that you can redact these documents for these security concerns, these national security concerns. And surely the procurement of vaccines and the procurement of necessary medical equipment falls under national security, because that's the exemption you've applied before on the release of documents. So is not this concern you are raising covered by the very words of the motion?
Actually, as I read the motion, David, the national security exemption as worded only applies to the documents relating to the vaccine task force. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not confident that indeed it would allow the redaction of certain information across the board. But I just am continuing to look through this motion. And as I said, I do want to work with all sides of this House. As a government, we want to work with all sides of the House. That's why when the OGO committee requested documentation, we provided it, and we're continually updating information about our contracts on our website. And we will continue to make information public as soon as it is not overly sensitive to do so. It's our commitment to transparency and accountability, and it's my commitment as Minister to the people of Canada.
I appreciate that the negotiations on these sorts of matters are done through the House Leader's office most often, but Mr. Rodriguez was not available to speak to us today. So I'm just wondering if you are aware of any negotiations or counter-proposal from the Liberals to the Conservatives on changing this motion to address your concerns, or you're just going to try to fight it and stop it when it goes to a vote on Monday?
I believe within the last hour, the House Leader has been proposing additional language for the motion, which is indicative of our willingness and concern that we do need to work together for the health and safety of Canadians. And I think everyone in the House of Commons shares this concern. We're in the middle of the pandemic still, and we need to get out to the other side together.
So does that mean you'd be willing to support this motion if you can get some changes as being put forward by your House Leader?
Well, I will take a deeper look at the motion, but I will say that it is very broad, and I'm not 100% sure of what the House Leader is proposing at the current time. So I'm going to take it back and offer my comments, but I will say that as the Procurement Minister, our documentation, our contracts, our negotiations are of front and center to me, and I will be raising those concerns when I speak with all sides of the House.
If this legislation truly is such a threat, though, to vaccine procurement and other necessary medical contracts that you're talking about, why would this not qualify as a vote of confidence? Your government has said today you won't make it a confidence vote, but if it is truly a threat to the pandemic response and your ability to get the medicines and treatments that the country needs, why wouldn't it be a confidence vote?
Well, David, I think we all have faith and hope that this government will be one in which other parties will come to the table with and reach an agreement in some way, shape, or form, so that we don't have to go down that road, as the Prime Minister has said, and I agree. This isn't the time for an election. We need to try to work together, and that's exactly what we're going to do each and every day.
But do you have any indications from your conversations with the Health Minister's office if there is a willingness to change the language to accommodate some of these concerns?
Look, my focus today and every day is to make sure our procurements are coming into Canada. We have over now 2 billion items of PPE procured. We have 282 doses of vaccines procured for Canadians, and we have rapid tests coming into Canada every day and week now. So that's my focus, and that's going to continue to be my focus because we need this stuff for Canadians.
Okay, Minister Anand, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, David. Take care.
Michelle Rempel is the Conservative health critic, and she joins me now from the foyer of the House of Commons. Ms. Rempel, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So Health Minister Patty Hajdu and other members of the Liberal government say that what you're calling for in this motion is going to impede the government's ability to focus on the health and economic crisis Canada is facing. Is there any merit in that argument from your view?
Absolutely not. 2 points. When we're talking about paralyzing government, it's the Liberal Party of Canada that shuttered Parliament, that prorogued Parliament, and has been stalling committees. This motion was introduced at the Health Committee over 2 weeks ago, and we've had to introduce it at the House to get some action. The second point is today we found out that staff that are designated to produce documents, access to information requests, that most departments have 50% underutilization right now because those employees are at home. They haven't been designated priority access. In order for Canada to move forward, we're in the second wave. Today, Ontario had record number of COVID cases. is Parliament should be evaluating what's working and what isn't so that we can chart a path forward together across party lines. These requests are completely reasonable, and we expect the government to comply with them.
You say they're reasonable, but they are significant in both volume and scope if you look at the amount of documents that you are requesting. And I know there are access to information people who could go find stuff, but there's also the people who have been buying PPE, for instance, or working on the vaccine procurement, who would then have to work with those people. And the argument is that they would be tied up from doing the emergency work to do the research work. Is there no merit in that?
I understand that the Liberals don't want Parliament to scrutinize their decisions, but the COVID response is the #1 public policy concern in Canada right now, and Parliament needs to scrutinize if the path that the government is the right course. This is the job of Parliament. This motion was introduced in the Health Committee over 2 weeks ago. That's 2 weeks that were wasted in terms of the production of this information and in its review. And what do we have? We don't have rapid tests readily available across the country. That in and of itself is worth parliamentary study. I just don't believe that there's anybody who doesn't want to get this done. I think that the government is doing this because they're worried that they have something to hide, and Parliament is back. We need to get on with business, and especially with the amount of money that the government has spent on the COVID response, we need to ensure that we're getting value for money, and that's the job of Parliament, so we need to get on with it.
Now, Jagmeet Singh was speaking earlier today and suggested that the New Democrats are prepared to support you on this, but they'd like to see some changes in your motion. Can you tell us what the NDP is looking for you to change?
Today, the NDP in their speeches indicated that they would be supporting the motion, as they did at committee, and we've been working collaboratively with both the NDP and the Bloc to ensure that that motion reflects what everybody wants to have in there. Today, we actually phoned the Liberal Party and said, look, if this timeline isn't reasonable to you, what is? We didn't even get our call returned today. So I just think that this is all excuses from the Liberals. We've been working collaboratively with opposition parties. They have indicated their support in press conferences today, as well as in speeches in the House. So this is something that the government is going to have to accept and move forward with. And I think that it's in the best interest of Canadians. We need to be scrutinizing if their response is working, how we can best move forward, what recommendations we should be giving to the government in that regard. And the information that we're asking for will allow us to do that, to do this. And that's, I think, what Canadians want. They want stability, and they want this information.
In my conversations with the New Democrats before this interview, the impression I was getting is that they support what you're trying to do, but it may be a case of too much too fast in terms of the timelines your motion allows for the documents to be turned over, which I believe is 15 days from the time the motion is voted on and approved. Are you willing to budge on that timeline, accept an amendment to give them more than 15 days if that's what's required?
I did ask the Minister of Health 4 times during question period and then 4 hours earlier to provide us with that timeline. But again, the Liberals did not return calls from any political party today. They haven't suggested any sort of amendment. So to me, it's really the Liberals that are obstructing this. I would say this, the NDP did, in their speeches today, say that they would be supporting the motion, which is really good news. It says that Health Committee can get on with studying what everybody in Canada is caring about, the pandemic, how we move forward, how we keep people safe while ensuring that people can get back to work and reunite with loved ones. And I'm just excited that after months of Parliament being shuttered, that we're going to be getting down to business.
But you were a Minister of State in the former Harper government when the Conservatives were in power. I mean, a request of this scope, I mean, you must have a sense that that would impact the operations of your department even in normal times, would it not?
Well, the Liberal government has not produced a budget to Parliament in nearly 2 years. The Parliament has been shuttered for many months. We've spent hundreds of millions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars without parliamentary oversight. It's about time for Parliament to get back to business, and I just don't accept that we can't do that. There was a quote today about the fact that Canada is really the only developed country in the world that isn't looking at access to information during COVID, during a time when civil liberties are being impacted, high levels of government spending as a priority. The fact that we've got half of the capacity of access to information staff being furloughed or sitting at home, that's a problem. I know these people want to do their job and be empowered. Let's move on with it. Let's have scrutiny. This is something that's happening across party lines. And then let's evaluate if the response that we have is working. I want to know what the vaccine protocol is, how the vaccine, when it arrives, is being distributed, who's getting it first. Same with rapid tests. How many can we expect? Who gets it first? Over what time period? Those are questions that the government should have been prepared to answer. The House is doing its job today. We're saying we need that information. This is just common sense. And if you look at the wording of the motion, there's no hyperbole in it. There's no rhetoric. There's no casting blame on the government. It's a request for information, as you in the media would do. And especially, I think, you in the media, we need this information so that you can do your job too. I think everybody is frustrated. This will break that log jam and we'll get some answers. And if everything's hunky-dory, the government has nothing to worry about.
No, I can assure you the mothballing of the access to information system at the federal level has been a source of real contention with the journalistic community throughout the pandemic, and a source of frustration. And I don't think there's disagreement with the idea that all of this unprecedented spending requires unprecedented oversight. But we just went to sort of
like it.
Well, no, I have to ask you questions. It is your motion. But we just went to the brink of an election call potentially yesterday over the wording of a motion and the talk of a need for compromise. And that's what I'm trying to get at. If the 15 days just becomes undeliverable, if the public service comes back and says, we just can't do this, because the politicians say one thing, and often it's the civil servants who then have to figure out if they can make it happen. I mean, Patty Hajdu is not going to go get these documents. So if the civil service were to say to you the 15-day deadline just can't be met, are you flexible on moving that to 30 days or 40 days, or what is it on your side?
I don't know if the Minister of Health accepted an interview with your show today, but that's really a question for her. I asked that question to her this morning. This motion was tabled 2 weeks ago, so she's had 2 weeks to ask her bureaucrats what is a reasonable timeline to produce these documents, to be transparent. So when I asked her over and over again, well, what's reasonable? What do you want to do? And the fact that they wouldn't even return the opposition party's calls here, I think to me that's a message that the government just doesn't want to do anything on this issue, which is different than what you're proposing. So that's really a question for the government. It's a question for the health minister. I think it's very unfortunate that they didn't collaborate in the House today. I think it really shows that there's a lot of political gamesmanship that they're pushing forward. Canadians don't want that on this issue. They want stability. They want some answers on when we're getting rapid tests, when we're getting a vaccine, under what circumstances, how that's going to be distributed, so that they can start planning their lives to either reunite with loved ones or have, go back to their work. And that's the role of the Health Committee. I'm glad to see collaboration among opposition parties on this, and we expect this motion to pass.
No, it's certainly after the rhetoric of the last couple of days about having to make Parliament work, it's incumbent on all sides, and the government, who said that a lot, it's incumbent on them to cooperate in situations like this. I want to ask you about something, though, that affects your home city right now quite significantly. That's a new pilot testing project being rolled out in Alberta, where travelers landing at the airport in Calgary, for example, they can shorten their quarantine time. If they agree to a test at the airport, they can, if it's negative, they only have to quarantine for a couple of days on the condition that they get a second test within a week or so. If this works, how much of a game changer could this be for reopening travel in Canada?
This is actually part of the motion that we're trying to pass today, is looking at this issue, right? It's something that certainly many people who work in the tourism and hospitality industry have been asking for, but more importantly, people that have been trying to reunite with family members have been asking for as well, because that 2-week quarantine really makes it quite difficult to work. The other thing I would say is, beyond just this pilot project, rapid testing could be a game changer for the 14-day quarantine writ large. I'm concerned as a parliamentarian about compliance with the quarantine. There was a case in Ottawa, a very high-profile case in Ottawa, with a worker who came back from abroad and then went into a long-term care facility. I think that I'm worried about it being, quote-unquote elitist. There's a lot of people who can't take 2 weeks off of work, especially if they have to wait for testing for a long period of time. Rapid testing would solve that problem. There's also a lot of exemptions to people crossing the border. I think about truckers, other people. If we had rapid tests, we'd actually have more people being tested rather than just relying on quarantine, where we know that there's enforcement issues. So I think that this is something I'm really excited to study the data on at the parliamentary committee, should this motion pass. But certainly it's something that I'm excited about after asking for rapid tests for the last month. And it really only came on the radar since the Conservative Party started asking about this.
Okay, Michelle Rempel, thank you so much for your time. I'm sure we're going to talk to you again on Monday.
Thank you.
The motion before the House to allow the Health Committee to look at the process will make sure Canadian healthcare workers get the best equipment and that taxpayers get value for money. Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister let the Health Committee do what it's supposed to do and make sure that we put the health of Canadians ahead of contracts for Liberal MPs?
The suggestion that our government, in those dark days in the spring, when we came together as a country to fight this novel global pandemic, was focused on anything other than protecting the health and safety of Canadians, working closely with the provinces, territories, and municipalities, is simply untrue, Mr. Speaker.
So the Liberal government survived a confidence vote on a Conservative motion yesterday. Today, another opposition motion is on the table. This one calls for a broad investigation by the Health Committee into the government's response to the pandemic. Liberals say that would eat up precious time that should be spent rolling out funding for Canadians. The opposition says Parliament needs oversight as billions and billions of tax dollars head out the door. Are we headed for another parliamentary showdown? Inevitably we are. Time for the Power Panel. David Hurley, partner in the Gandalf Group and host of the Hurley Burley podcast. Jenny Byrne, a former top staffer to Prime Minister Stephen Harper and Ontario Premier Doug Ford, now a principal at Jenny Byrne and Associates. Andrew Thompson, Chief of Government Relations for the University of Toronto and former Saskatchewan Finance Minister. And Emily Nicolas, a columnist with Le Devoir. Welcome to you all.
Hi.
Hello.
Jenny, I'd like to start with you first. Maybe Canadians won by not having an election, but these mid-pandemic showdowns, can the parties really win anything in these?
Well, David, I just want to correct one thing that you said. You said this was a Conservative confidence motion, and it wasn't.
Right.
It was an opposition day motion that the Liberal Party turned into a confidence motion. So that's much different than that. I think that we have been in this 7 months, and Dr. Hinshaw earlier said today it feels like an eternity, and it does. But because we don't know when we're actually going to be back from this new normal, it is unrealistic for the Liberal Party to think that they can get away with having zero accountability in when they're making billions of dollars of spending decisions.
David, what do you think? Does anybody win an event like yesterday? I mean, it was a show of force by the Liberals, and they sort of got what they wanted without having to make concessions, but does it cost them anything with Canadians when they do something like this?
No, I don't think so. I think it was a clear win for them. They brushed the opposition back from the plate and got control over their minority parliament. I think that's what they needed to do. And you know, I mean, all the rest of this is really just political gamesmanship. And all I would ask Jenny is, if Stephen Harper, when she was running that operation, had been in his majority situation, would he have allowed such a committee to have been created? The answer is no. He'd have voted it down. So if you can vote it down when you're in a majority, why wouldn't you do it when you're in a minority? The reality is that you can't have an ongoing committee to look into corruption of the government. First of all, it is a ridiculous fishing expedition that will take up scads of government and media attention. And the second thing is that it's a complete explicit expression of non-confidence in the government. They were right to conclude it's a matter of confidence. How can you have Parliament voting that the government is so corrupt that it needs an ongoing committee to investigate it, and yet insist that you have confidence in that government to remain in office? It was all a play.
Andrew, would you have allowed such a committee when you were in government in Saskatchewan? And to David's point, would you let something like this happen if you're in a majority? I mean, is there a winner in all of this from yesterday?
I mean, certainly in minority situations, and I did serve in a minority government, there is a higher level of oversight that's expected, and it's expected in more real time than otherwise. And I think that it does look arrogant on the part of the Liberals to rebuff that yesterday. It was a definite game of gamesmanship. And unfortunately, I think I've not understood their strategy as to why they want to put more spotlight on the wheat controversy. This, to me, is just an odd strategy on their part, and not one that makes a lot of sense. To the bigger issue, though, I do think that Canadians shouldn't be so naive as to think there's not corruption within our system. Now, I personally am not sure that should be dealt with through a parliamentary committee, or whether it's better dealt with through some kind of an independent commission like we see in Australia. But we do need to step up and improve the way that we do this. The current Ethics Act approach is not working. The parliamentary oversight is too prone to theatrics. But we do need to make sure that when there are legitimate concerns about billions of dollars being spent, that there are appropriate avenues for politicians, no matter who they are, on which party or how high of office, to be accountable.
Emily, what's your sense of what we saw here in Ottawa yesterday?
I think it's about partisan politics. I mean, it sounds very simple what I'm saying, but it is what it is, in the sense that now we're in the middle of a very historical moment for Canadians. There's this pandemic going on, but there's also a lot of economic uncertainties. There's a lot of social inequalities as well that are on the rise. And the reality is that yesterday we almost faced an election on some parliamentary committee. And so there's a disconnect between what's going on in the minds of average Canadian and what's going on in Ottawa right now. And it's not looking good, I think, for any party. It's making, Parliament looks like it's disconnected from the actual interest and priorities of Canadian. And it looks like everybody's just busy playing games with one another instead of looking at what the issue is. And I know that a lot of different parties are like, no, we need to play this game because I'm the one who's, focused on the issue. But the reality is it shows so much that people are playing games with one another that it's not even elegant. It's not even pretty. You cannot, when politicians are looking at you saying, no, this is about the better, what's better for the country. I think most people can know that it's about partisan politics.
Jenny,
people can tell.
Jenny, there may be more gains with this other motion that is coming from the Conservatives, from Michelle Rempel Garner in particular, for this broad disclosure of pandemic documents and other documents going back several years that the government says will essentially cripple the civil service by forcing them to go on this document hunt and could potentially lead to the release of sensitive information that could inhibit their vaccine and procurement efforts. Do you buy that argument? Is there legitimacy in what the government is saying here and the ability to maybe scale some of it back or not do the disclosure as large as the opposition wants?
It's absolutely ridiculous. There's always redaction powers for cabinet confidences or things in terms of whether it affects negotiation on vaccines. But not only has this government doing a ton of spending, they've also made decisions early on that they still haven't really been held accountable for, that actually the opposition and Canadians do deserve answers. Why was it that we had a critical shortage of PPE at the start of this pandemic, and to find out that Public Health Canada, shipped 16 tons of PPE to China?
That's an established fact, Jenny, though, that PPE was going to expire, and it was either trash it because it was going to expire or send it somewhere where it could be used, and the decision was made to send it to China. Now, whether they should have had replacements ready to go is another thing, but this was like a carton of milk that was going bad.
Oh, David, that's absolutely ridiculous.
It's not. These things have a best before date.
But you can spin the Liberal lines, but that doesn't change the fact that this government made numerous decisions, anywhere from being behind the 8 ball on rapid testing, not closing our borders, not enforcing the 2-week quarantine, and they absolutely deserve to be questioned by the opposition on that.
David, do you think what do you make of the Liberal argument that they can limit some of the access? Should they be able to limit some of the access to information that the Conservatives want here?
I'm not fully expert in exactly what all the implications of what the opposition's asking for. But I think that despite the position I took earlier on the specific motion that was rejected yesterday, I think that I agree with the position that there's been so much spending going on and there hasn't been a budget, there hasn't been an accounting, that I think it's fair to have a committee to look into pandemic spending and to look into handling of the pandemic. That kind of accountability, I think, is fully warranted. And I would be very surprised if the Liberals were to make this latest motion a confidence motion in the same way that the previous one was. I think they're very different in character.
Okay, Andrew, I want to get a quick thought from you before we go to break on just the position Jagmeet Singh found himself in yesterday. He ended up siding with the Liberals and against the Conservative motion, and he's taken some heat for this. People saying things on Twitter like he's no Jack Layton when it comes to a minority government. What did you make of the position Mr. Singh found himself in, and could he have played this any other way?
Well, he was in a no-win position, and I think that he did what was right, which is focus on the issue Canadians want the attention on. They don't want a parliament that's paralyzed. They don't want a parliament that is inactive for 2 months as it goes through an election. They want to make sure that their legislators, their government are there to actually act in their interests. And I think he did what has been true to his mission as he's gone through this parliament. continuing to make sure that it stays focused on the pandemic. There was a lot of effort by other parties to drag it off into discussions about the WE scandal or other issues, and he's been really steadfast on this, and I think he deserves a lot of credit for standing up. It's unfortunate the Liberals have not been more gracious about that. I think it's unfortunate the Liberals brought this to a confidence motion and forced that type of a hand rather than recognizing that they too have a role to play in this, being a constructive parliament. But I think all things said, that he's going to come out of this looking pretty good.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.